In biology, we use the word gustatory to refer to taste. We taste at these buds that have elongated cells with a sensory microvilli tip. Take a look at the diagram at the right and you'll see what I'm talking about. There's the taste cell. The microvilli are on the right side where there's a pore or opening, say in the tongue. And from here, the impulses are going to travel to a gustatory cortex located in our brain. Smell, the biological word is olfactory. And these cells, which are just modified neurons, are located within what's called an olfactory epithelium in the upper part of the nasal cavity. Take a look at this diagram. You'll see that the nasal cavity is huge, and we realize that when we get a sinus infection, it can become a big problem because it's a big space. Well, in this area, there are receptor proteins in the upper roof of that sinus with receptor proteins that are going to detect specific odor molecules. From here, the impulses are going to travel through neurons to an olfactory bulb, which is really just an extension of our brain. The eye is, wow, pretty amazing. The cornea is one of my favorite tissues of the whole body because it's made of collagen fibers, it's clear, and it is the fastest growing tissue of the body. So if you ever scrape your eye and you have blurry vision and then a half hour later, wow, I can see again. That's because the cornea grows so fast. It's a protective layer of the eye. Behind that is the aqueous humor. It's a watery compartment that's anterior in front of the lens. Helps keep the shape of the eye. Behind the lens is the choroid. The choroid is a busy tissue because it's a middle coat. Its job is to absorb stray light. We don't want light bouncing around inside of our eye. Can you imagine? Well, that would mess us up. In the anterior or front of the eye, we call it the iris. And the iris is going to regulate the amount of light that enters the eye. So if you walk into a dark room, that pupil is controlled by the iris. So the pupil opens up so we get more light in there. If you go into a bright light, then the pupil is going to shut down. If you see someone you love, that pupil is going to expand because you're trying to get in as much information as possible. That way you always know if that special person in your life still really thinks you're special. All right, the sclera is the outer fibrous, tough protective layer, and it is quite tough, the white of the eye. Retina in the back of the eye, this is where the image is focused, and there are photoreceptors. Rod cells are for black and white vision. They tend to be the most acute or insensitive, and there are also cone cells for color. But we rely on the rod cells at night. If you ever looked at, let's say, a woman with bright red lips, a picture of a woman with bright red lips under the moonlight and her lips look black, kind of creepy. The optic nerve is where impulses are going to leave the retina and exit, moving on to the brain. The cone cells are packed in the fovea, so this is where our color vision is most centralized in a little depression in the retina. Vitreous humor is a clear gelatinous fluid. It's a little different than aqueous humor in front. It's going to maintain the lens in place in the shape of the eye. So let's say you're on a motorcycle without goggles, your eye doesn't just become compressed. That wouldn't be a good thing. Ciliary muscles, if you look at the front part of the choroid, there's that choroid again. They're tiny muscles, and they're going to attach to the lens, and they're going to stretch that lens for accommodation. As we get older, our lens gets harder, and those poor ciliary muscles are pulling and pulling, but the lens just doesn't want to change shape. And that's when we reach for those eyeglasses. Nearsightedness, sometimes people think, well, you can't see near things. No. What nearsighted it is take a look at the upper right diagram. That's when the lens of our eye focuses the image in front of the retina. Remember, it's supposed to focus right on the retina, but now it's focused in front. And so to correct it, we often use a concave lens. Why does this happen? Well, sometimes people's eyeballs are long. And there's other problems sometimes with the lens. Farsightedness, it's not because you can't see far objects. It's when the lens focuses the image beyond the retina. Look at the middle diagram. Sometimes the eye is kind of short. Maybe we're born with that condition. Maybe the lens is not accommodating correctly. And we need a convex lens to correct that. Astigmatism is when the cornea, if you remember the cornea, it's the outer clear protective layer of the eye. Well, sometimes it's irregular. It should be smooth and glassy, but it's not a perfect world, so the cornea has an irregular surface. And of course, we have to use a lens that's irregular as well. The outer ear, sometimes people think the ear is just the pinna. That's the part we see. It's a cartilaginous structure that gathers sound. But there's more to the outer ear than just that. There's an outer ear, auditory ear canal, and that's where ceruminous glands are going to pump out cerumen, often known as earwax. And it's a marvelous substance as long as we don't jam it in there. We let it slough off naturally. Maybe let the hot shower water flow in there and liquefy it a little bit. But we don't dig around in there. Middle ear is where the smallest bones of the body are. They're called ossicles. They're going to get moved by the tympanum. If you look at the tympanum, it's an eardrum. So a sound strikes the tympanum. The tympanum bows in and out, kind of sort of like a drum, and it's going to move those ossicles. And here are the ossicles. Malleus, nearest to the tympanum, then the incus, and the stapes. The mallet, the anvil, and the stirrup. Maybe you learned them that way long ago when you were a kid. Anyway, those are 3 bones. And in the middle ear is the auditory, or also called eustachian tube, that extends from the middle ear to the nasopharynx so that we can equalize air pressure in that middle ear. Sometimes we do this by yawning or swallowing. So it's air-filled. It's very different than the inner ear. The inner ear is mostly fluid-filled, and much of the work takes place inside that snail shell-shaped structure called the cochlea. Inside the cochlea is a spiral organ, sometimes called the organ of Corti, and let's take a look at that. Here it is. This is inside that cochlea. There is a tectoral membrane, and when the ossicles of the middle ear are moving because of sound, and they're going to press on the oval window, then that is going to slide the tectoral membrane across stereocilia. These are tiny hairs that are connected to nerve cells. It's almost like a violin, playing a violin. Back and forth, the tectoral membrane slides across the stereocilia, and then the impulse is sent to the cochlear nerve and onward to the brain. Oh, we don't have to become deaf as we age. Did you know that? Some people that live deep in the rainforest, they may be 80 years old and they hear just as well as a 2-year-old child. What happens over time is anything over 100 decibels can destroy those tiny hair-like stereocilia. Rock band, chainsaw, loud car engine, and many other things that are everyday objects, like sometimes hair dryers or racket of all sorts. And once they're twisted, then the game is over. We can't straighten them out. You can see damaged stereocilia on the right. Rotational equilibrium, that is when we say no. The ampullae of our semicircular canals, we're looking at the middle ear here. They're semicircular, they're twisting all over the place. They have hair cells with stereocilia, so they're tiny hairs, and they're embedded in this jelly-like cupula. The cupula means cup, so it's sort of cup-like. And this makes sense. When we rotate our head from side to side, the movement's going to cause pressure against the cupula. The cupula is going to bend, and now the stereocilia are being stimulated, sending a message to the brain, no. Gravitational is yes, up and down. These are tiny bones embedded in an otolithic membrane. Kind of strange. When the head nods up and down, the heavy otoliths in the membrane are going to sag downwards. This makes sense, right? They're tiny bone cells, and they're going to just go down, and that bends the stereocilia. Sometimes people have a problem with their balance. It's because of semicircular canals. But sometimes it's due to these stereocilia. The otoliths get out of alignment, and people are dizzy. And sometimes there's an easy treatment, sometimes not. Infections, there are many. I'm just going to mention a few here. Meningitis. This is an infection of the meninges. The meninges are a tough, fibrous material that surround and protect the central nervous system. All sorts of things get in there. Fungi can, viruses, bacteria. And once that's inflamed, we have a problem because the brain is encased in bone and it has nowhere to go. It's the leading cause of mental retardation in the United States. And children under 4 are most susceptible. Often infections in this age group happen quickly. Leprosy. I've seen this in Nepal and Kenya. It's still out there, unfortunately. It's very treatable, though. It's caused by a small bacterium called a mycobacterium. It's a group, actually. These are bacteria that destroy sensory neurons. If you remember the basic neuron pattern, there are sensory, inner, and motor neurons. The sensories are the ones that detect sense. So in the skin, it's loaded with sensory neurons. If the skin becomes desensitized, then we have sometimes self-inflicted injuries, and they don't mean to. They put their hand on a hot plate, their skin starts to sizzle, but they can't even feel it because the pain receptors in the skin are dead. Polio has been mostly eradicated due to vaccines, but it is still out there, especially individuals that are older and were not vaccinated. It's caused by the poliovirus found in fecal contaminated soil and water. Unlike leprosy, this virus is going to attack the motor neurons. Motor neurons are the ones that innervate or stimulate the target tissue, such as muscle. So the impulse never reaches there, and we have a paralysis of that organ or muscle tissue. Rabies is out there. I've been vaccinated. I've got 3 shots of rabies virus, and it's not as bad as people say. It can cause encephalitis, and I mentioned this before. The brain cannot withstand swelling because it's encased in a bony case. So it's a very dangerous disorder when the brain is inflamed. Don't ever let an animal that you don't know come up close to your face or come up and even lick you, because what if you have a little crack in your skin? Sometimes the rabies virus can just travel through a tiny opening in your skin and move into the nervous system quickly. The results symptoms, sometimes the throat is constricted, and so the individual cannot swallow mucus, resulting in what is called foaming of the mouth. But Hollywood has really exaggerated this. You have someone walk along with foam pouring out of their mouth. No. Usually it's just a small trickle of saliva, and their behavior is kind of odd, certainly. TSE, or transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. This has been out there for years. Headhunters that ate other humans often suffered from this. And we can suffer from this if we consume meat that is infected with prions. Prions are it's really bizarre. They're a protein that can move into tissue and start to reproduce. So it's little infectious particles, and they're smaller than viruses. Prions are very resistant to high temperatures, household disinfectants, and um, other factors that kill most bacteria. Dense plaques form holes, hence the name spongiform. Summary: taste, think of gustatory microvilli. Smell, olfactory receptor proteins going up in that upper nasal sinus. The eye, cornea, that wonderful clear protective layer made of collagen. Aqueous humor is a liquid-filled anterior compartment. Choroid does a lot. Stray light it absorbs. It forms the ciliary muscles. It also creates an iris that regulates the amount of light coming through the pupil. The sclera is the white of the eye. It's very protective and fibrous. Vitreous humor is the inner gelatinous material that maintains the shape and keeps the retina pressed up against the back of the eye. Retina has rods for black and white. Those are the dominant sensors. And then the cones for color. Those impulses are going to the optic nerve. Nearsightedness, okay, unfortunately the image is in front of the retina. Farsighted, it focuses beyond the retina. Sometimes someone has a short eye. Astigmatism, irregular cornea surface. The outer ear, what people think of as the ear, is the pinna, auditory canal, and ceruminous glands that make that wonderful earwax. If you don't chew your food enough, like especially people that eat soft diets of mushy foods, often have an impacted cerumen problem. Also, people that wear earplugs can jam earwax in there. Okay, middle ear is the tympanum, the three tiny bones, the ossicles, malleus, incus, stapes. The eustachian tube or auditory tube relieves air pressure by being connected to the nasopharynx. Finally, the middle ear. This is where we actually start to convert that vibration into a electrical impulse. The oval window picks up the vibration, sends it on to the cochlea, which is also called the spiral or organ of Corti inside there, and that's the violin story where the tectoral slides across stereocilia. Over 100 decibels, anything like a lawnmower, rock concert, chainsaw, many loud noises we hear every day can destroy the stereocilia. Rotational, that is when we say no, and the cupula is bent and the stereocilia send this on. Gravitational is yes, stereocilia, and this is where the otolithic membrane sags. Last of these summary infections, meningitis. Inflammation of the meninges often causes retardation, or it's a leading cause anyway. Leprosy, a tiny mycobacterium, destroys patches of the sensory neurons in the skin. Polio, fecal transmitted virus, infects the motor neurons. Those are the ones that innervate or stimulate glands, muscle tissue. Rabies is out there. Don't ever let a bat fly around your house, by the way. They can urinate rabies viruses, and that virus comes airborne. It's the aerosol. And people scream and run around. They don't realize they're inhaling rabies viruses. Okay, it's going to constrict the throat and can cause encephalitis or swelling of the brain. And finally, the prion, tinier than viruses, little pieces of protein that can move into our brain causing plaques, spongiform encephalopathy. Wow. That's a good story.